Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargav. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. Out of the four engines that power the Indian economy, which is consumer spending, private sector investment, government expenditure, and the fourth one, exports, it is the year-on-year growth of exports which has been the poorest and the most disappointing of our growth engines. Exports add to a nation's growth by catering to the domestic demand of another country, another economy. And most developed economies tend to have a thriving export sector which adds to their national output and growth. Despite having all that it takes to have a thriving export sector and notwithstanding the government's efforts to provide policy support to the sector, India's exports have been languishing now for a decade. Our exports have just not grown since 2011 during a time when the exports of even the likes of Bangladesh have grown enormously. Bangladesh's exports have grown from a measly $2.4 billion in 2010 to a relatively huge $39 billion in 2021, a growth of almost 15 times in a decade. The total exports of India were to the tune of $447 billion in 2011, and after a decade, they were just $474 billion in 2020, and then dipping to $424 billion in the COVID year of financial year 21. We have all that is needed to ramp up our exports, from low-cost labor to highly skilled manpower, and from natural resources, agricultural resources, to active trade diplomacy to support exports. But we have yet failed to set up an ecosystem that is needed for large-scale export production. Ironically, a cost-efficient production for the domestic Indian market has also not taken off, as is seen from our dependence on Chinese imports, even for the smallest of items like agarbattis and festival lights. And talking of exports of India and China, though they are not any more comparable, the gap between the two has only increased over the years, not just in terms of numbers and volumes, but also in terms of levels of sophistication and the value add in the exports basket of each country. While India's exports have inched up from $447 billion in 2011 to $474 billion in 2020, to then dip to $424 billion in the COVID year of 2021, the Chinese exports, on the other hand, have shot up from $1.65 trillion, which is $1,650 billion in 2010, to $3.3 trillion, which is $3,300 billion in 2021, capturing almost 15% of the global exports last year. The Chinese export juggernaut has been simply unstoppable ever since it surpassed the USA to become the world's biggest exporter in 2009, while that of India has been almost a non-starter. And that's evident again from two recent reports on the export performances of India and China in 2021, which is last year. The highlights of these reports are worth a discussion to think over. The first highlight is that India's mercantile exports hit a record $37.81 billion in December 2021, as the overseas demand for Indian products remained robust. As against $37.81 billion exports of India in December 21, the exports in the case of China for December 21 were almost 10 times, at $340.5 billion in a single month. And while India recorded a trade deficit of $21.6 billion in December 2021, China, on the other hand, recorded a trade surplus of $94.46 billion in December, and it ended the calendar year 2021 with a stunning trade surplus of $676 billion. As we said, no comparison between the two. Then, the top products in India's exports basket consisted of engineering goods, petroleum products, gems and jewelry, organic and inorganic chemicals, and drugs and pharmaceuticals. The top export items of China, on the other hand, consist of value addition items of a better nature, including computers, broadcasting equipment, telephones, and office machines and equipment, showing far greater sophistication and value addition in the exports portfolio of China. Further, on a cumulative basis, India's merchandise exports during April to December 21 was about $301 billion for a 9-month period, as against $2,658 billion for the same period in the case of China, with its monthly exports exceeding $300 billion per month from September 2021 onwards to touch a record monthly export of $340 billion in December 2021, which is more than 9 months of exports of India. While India's exports rose by 40% year on year in December 2021 because of lower export base of last year, it was not so in the case of China, whose exports grew by 30% year on year in December 21 without much of a low base benefit. If India's exports went up sharply in December 21, so was the case with its imports even much more, such that while India is likely to record a massive trade deficit in 2021 and financial year 22, it is a huge trade surplus in 2021 in the case of China. The missing key element in India's growth has been robust exports. For its own rapid economic growth, India needs to ramp up its exports, for which, despite China being India's enemy number one, there is just no harm in learning export lessons from China and replicating them in India to the extent possible. From a measly share of less than 1% of global exports in the 70s to a stunning 15% in 2021, China has emerged from the periphery of world trade to become a global trade titan. In a matter of 10 years, from the time it joined the WTO in 2001 to 2010, China was already the world's undisputed export champion, and it continues to be so. It has set up a large number of dominant industries that have created production and materials for export in sectors like consumer electronics, data processing technology, optical gear, medical equipment, clothing, and other textiles. And while it did so in the last 25 years, its economy expanded rapidly, lifting over 850 million persons out of poverty, which is an event unprecedented in world history. Its export dominance was best evident in early 2020 when, due to COVID infections that were gathering across China, the production processes in many industries across the world were stalled or slowed because of disruptions forced by Chinese suppliers. At the heart of China's export strategy and growth have been its incentives, policy and promotion through special economic zones, SEZs, starting from 1979 when China set up its first SEZs in the coastal cities of Shenzhen, Shantou, Zhuhai, and Xiamen, giving them tax and business incentives and the freedom to invest in and set up businesses in those SEZs. Apart from the special economic zones, China put up a friendly and attractive tax code using those of Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore as role models for tax and business reforms. And to facilitate business and industry and attract FDI, which is foreign direct investment, China established various types of SEZs such that today it houses more than half of the world's special economic zones. Its variety of SEZs are based on various factors, and of course, they have been extremely successful in that model. The kind of SEZs are, first of all, based on industry clusters in order to support the development of certain industries. They are industry specific. The next are SEZs, which are based on local industrial parks with emphasis on local industries for regional governments. It then has SEZs which are based on international cooperation to establish zones which are dedicated for specific nations. It has also set up SEZs based on geographical areas which are based on geographical features and resources of a particular region. It has also set them up on the basis of what we call administrative areas, which are related to existing administrative regions of the government there. It also has corporate SEZs, which are industrial parks set up by companies with their own supply chains and their dedicated infrastructure. These SEZs in China offer tax incentives and lenient regulations to encourage investments, and they thus account for over 80% of foreign direct investment into China. The incentives and benefits offered by China's special economic zones include First of all, reduce income tax. Tax rate of 15% for an SEZ unit as against 33% which are not an SEZs. The second, no minimum alternate tax or any taxes in case the unit incurs losses. Then, reduce taxes for 5 years upon becoming profitable after having suffered losses. Then, exemption from local taxes for certain industries. It also provides for duty-free exports and lower import tariffs. SEZs are also facilitating the setting up of joint ventures between domestic and foreign companies within the SEZs. They also have special and concessional regulations. And finally, they also give the right to set up dedicated infrastructure for those units which are located in SEZs. Despite all this, the fact is that China's exports are slowing. China's export growth has been powered by its numerous SEZs, but it is slowing due to various reasons, and that gives India a much needed opportunity to increase its own exports. The reasons that China's exports are slowing down and are clearly past their peak are many, and they are worth having a look at. The first reason, China's economy is maturing, making its industries more dependent on domestic market demand than on export markets. Its share of exports in its GDP has been declining, giving an opportunity to other nations which has benefited the likes of Vietnam, Bangladesh, etc., not India as yet. The second, its labor costs have gone up, eroding its competitiveness, particularly in labor-intensive production of items that need more and more of labor input. Production is relocating from China to low-cost nations, giving countries like India a chance. We need to take it. The third, automation and artificial intelligence and robotics are making it viable to reshift production to developed economies itself, which had gone to China for the low cost of labor benefits. The fourth, China's exports are facing headwinds because of geopolitical friction, because of trade wars, because of national policy shifts and social and environmental aspects of development, which are reversing the hyper-globalization which had immensely benefited China in the past. And finally, growing imports by China are also eroding its own share in global trade. These are the reasons why China's exports are going down, and that provides a window of opportunity to India. So if SEZs were the magic mantra of Chinese exports, it is not that India did not adopt that strategy. India did try the SEZ strategy, and it has presently got 265 operational SEZs in the country. But despite attractive tax benefits, SEZs in India have failed to deliver. And that's because, apart from tax breaks, the SEZ units have faced the same oppressive and onerous business environment, which involves corruption, red tapeism, local goons patronized by the ruling political parties, and pathetic infrastructure, which are all anti-growth and which are all anti-exports. India needs to get its business environment, to get its entire ecosystem in place before exports from India will truly take off. This is Akhilesh Bhargav signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.